What did that bitch do at your wedding? Story 1. My bridesmaid. I had only a glimpse of her crazy prior to this. Frequent emotional meltdowns throughout the day, disappear to cry for a while, sucker another bridesmaid to comfort her, and carry on like nothing without identifying a source of discontent. Yelled at the nicest woman in the building, not even at the wedding party, just being helpful, and stormed off swearing when her decorations weren't perfect, left saying, "I can't do this," and drove away in a fit with flowers for the reception in her car, eventually showing up late, adding flowers to tables and acting as if nothing happened. Bridesmaids were excellent buffers the whole time, and it later came out that she was jealous of me getting married to a man, and not her. Story 2. My sister's wedding was a bit over the top, but beautiful. Castle, south of France, need I say more? She had this group of friends who all put some money in an envelope as a present. One girl, the new girlfriend of one of the boys, said something like, "I don't have a lot to give and feel embarrassed to put my participation in front of you." So she took the envelope in the loo and added her money there, away from judging eyes. Yep, you guessed it, she took more than $500 from the envelope. They only find out when one of those friends asked, weeks later, if the newlyweds had enjoyed the $1,000 during the honeymoon. The girl's excuse was that she was planning her own wedding and could just afford a city hall affair, and it was so unfair my sister had such a great venue. I'm personally quite immune to Princess Wedding Day, but stealing money at a wedding is so wrong. I think the girl ended up as a bit of a castaway. My sister's marriage didn't last anyway, so I don't know what happened to her group of friends, but I often think of this girl and imagine her as one of life's constantly unhappy and envious. Story 3. My mother-in-law changed her reception venue behind my back. Luckily, I found out and was able to get it changed back. This was my first introduction to her boundary issues. I have since learned that if she thinks there is even the slightest chance that someone won't do what she wants, then she feels completely entitled to use whatever means necessary to get her way. I think she legitimately believes that people who won't do what she wants are purposely being mean to her. She also passed out dollar store glow necklaces at her reception. She didn't ask me or anything, of course. It was a complete surprise to see her handing out glow necklaces as wedding favors. Story 4. Not a witch, a little guy, big mouth, was a really close friend until at my wedding. He stood in front of my mom when we were cutting the cake and proceeded to give her the finger when she asked him to move over a little. Just after that, while my dad was taking photos of me and my wife cutting the cake, he keeps nudging my dad's arm so he would get a shaky photo. My dad gave him a swift elbow to say freaking stop. Then said stomps on my dad's foot. My dad loses it, pushes him out of the door to my father-in-law, who then pushes him further outside to his brother, who is a big guy and an ex-bouncer, picks him up by the collar and slaps him around the face a couple of times and drops him on the floor. Cops were called because he wouldn't calm down and had a night in the cells. I don't speak to him anymore. If you're reading this, Ricky, you were a The dad and dad-in-law combo pleases me. Family unity. Story 5. She deliberately took forever to get ready and started a fight with her boyfriend, my husband's best friend and best man, right before the wedding. They showed up late because of the whole thing, which caused her whole wedding ceremony to be 20 minutes late. It is well known that she doesn't like me, so it was obviously a power play and done on purpose. She then didn't talk to me once during the entire wedding. It felt very awkward. I have one photo of me on the dance floor and she's in the background giving me the worst stink eye. Story 6. Not mine, but my friend's brother's rather religious wedding. Bride's mother makes a speech and says deadpan, "If you hurt her, I will slit your throat." In her speech, at the wedding where her daughter is marrying the nicest guy, everyone was so stunned and embarrassed. No one laughed. Bride and groom could barely look at her. He's down to earth and would cut out his kidney for you if needed. He's someone I look up to because he's always ready to help people at the drop of a hat. His in-laws are Jesus-loving psychos who say horrible, terrible things about him for no reason. They drag his clothes through the mud for no reason. It infuriates me no end. Those people won the son-in-law lottery and they'd rather be petty wackos. Story 7. At my brother's wedding, his mother-in-law sat her 11 last-minute guests at our guest's table because she clearly did not give a damn about my family's guests. We couldn't add another table because we were at the max tables that would fit in the venue. So I had to ask the reception venue staff to add chairs to our other tables, which overcrowded our other tables and messed up our seating chart. His mother-in-law cut me off saying, "No, you cannot have 13 people to a table. It's unlucky." "Then why did you steal our table, huh? You freaking dumbass superstitious witch. What the hell were we supposed to do? Ask our guests to leave?" I ignored her, turned to the staff member and had them add the chairs anyway. Okay, I'm done ranting. Story 8. My uncle. He made a scene about how his doctor had misdiagnosed his mental illness. He doesn't have one. He's an attention whore and claims he has every disease or disorder under the sun. For years, how he was going to sue them, etc. He literally stood up and made a speech about it. We had a very small wedding, only about 40 guests. so it was completely inappropriate. My aunt was a lifelong hypochondriac with a nasty temper. She'd go to a doctor, he'd tell her there was nothing wrong, she'd let loose with every swear word she could muster and would be told never to come back. At her funeral, I asked her son why she hadn't been seen for something she did not have to die from, and he said every doctor in town and all of the emergency rooms had thrown her out and she didn't think anyone would take her seriously. Died from something totally treatable. Story 9. My significant other and I ended up doing a courthouse-type marriage, did the papers, found someone to marry us, and went to her office to do it. The only people there were my ex-stepdad, I call him bonus dad, mom, aunt, uncle, and grandmother. My mom was my maid of honor, bonus dad was my significant other's best man. Right in the middle of our vows, my mom breaks down sobbing, interrupting everything. The witch is obviously trying to get her attention of her since she can't seem to stand not being in the middle of everything. You try to continue over her sobbing, but only starts crying louder. My aunt, being the amazing person she is, grabbed the ring from my mom and pushed her toward my uncle, who pretty much dragged her outside. Aunt quickly announced she was the maid of honor now, which I was completely fine with, and the vows carried on. After signing everything, we got out to get to the car, and my mom was just furious at me for letting our aunt do that. I just ignored her and went to the car. On the upside, when we were saying our vows, bonus dad started tearing up. It made me happy because it was super unlike him. Kind of guy who never says, I love you, because that's just him. Ex-first sergeant who served from 1972 to 2007, manly man. I love you, bonus dad. Frick you, mom. Story 10. I get angry just thinking about this. It was my husband's best friend's mom, who was not invited, but showed up anyway, and brought a bunch of small children with her. It was explicitly a no kids, no exceptions wedding. Tried to sit at the same table as me and tried to take pictures of me while I was eating, and loudly criticized one of the caterers because she thought she saw him put a used spoon into a buffet dish. He didn't. My pretty blunt mom straight up asked her, "Who are you, and why are you here?" I addressed all the invitations and I know we didn't invite you. To which she replied, "Well, my son needed a ride." My mom told her to leave, which was so unbelievably awkward, but she left without making more of a scene. Your mom is the queen of badassery, with a spine of titanium. Story 11. After the ceremony, we were taking group pics with both families. After a couple of pictures, my mother-in-law starts walking around loudly proclaiming, "Can we get a picture with just the close family, please?" My husband and I were like, "Sure," but then she kept saying it over and over again, until I finally realized she wanted a pic without me in it, but was just being passive-aggressive about it. So finally I'm like, "Do you want me to move?" And she's like, "Yeah, that would be great. I've been meaning to get some family pics done, and this is the perfect location." Continues to get a million pics of her. She's my husband's stepmom. Her kids and their families, and my husband and his brother, while I'm just standing off to the side awkwardly. Then come Christmas. She dares to send my parents a Christmas card using one of the pics of just them from the wedding with a little "from our family to yours" line. This on top of the million other things she's done to be awful. I cannot stand this woman. Story 12. Maid of honor at my wedding. The ceremony went off without any problems, and she was actually a huge help with setting everything up and organizing most of the day. During the cocktail hour afterward, she gets absolutely smashed and then punches her boyfriend in the face, then somehow convinces him he has been kicked out and has to leave. I spoke to the owner and the bartenders and told them not to serve her any more alcohol at this point, but they didn't think it was an issue yet. As soon as her boyfriend is out of the parking lot, she drags one of my groomsmen to the bathroom and gives his skin flute a thorough cleaning. Manages to get drunker because she was tipping the bartender a lot. She then stumbles onto the dance floor during my wife's dance with her father, and managed to stop her before any real interruption happens to the dance, but she then tries to kiss me in front of everyone. I kinda push and drop her and she hits the floor like I'd shot out both her kneecaps and started crying hysterically. My mother-in-law runs over and drags this stupid witch out of the reception hall, all the while she's shrieking like a banshee because I threw her to the ground. Everything is good for around 2 hours while the trash bin of horror is nowhere to be seen. Until the owner of the golf course taps me on the shoulder and asks to speak to me outside in private. I go outside and see her boyfriend has returned. I didn't mind seeing there because I actually liked him, but his face is panicked and he just starts apologizing for something. I was pretty drunk, so it took me a few seconds to realize the tire marks all over the 9th green leading up to the golf cart about 90% submerged in the pond right beside the green. Wasn't too concerned about her dumbass, but unfortunately, she was still alive and thrashing around trying to get out of the pond. I just laughed and told the owner I wasn't paying a single cent for any damages. I told him to stop serving her hours previously and to call the police and have her charged for destroying the green and driving the cart into the pond. Surprisingly, he was very understanding of my point of view, and we worked together to get everything sorted out. She ended up owing him just over 15 grand, 8 or 9 for the cart, and the rest was to fix the green and lost wages for him not being able to offer people a full 18 holes of golf. Her parents just paid for all of it, and she's currently on a soul-searching adventure in Asia. Despite all this, my wedding was still the most amazing day of my life, and my wife actually thought most of what happened was pretty funny, in a Jerry Springer dumpster donkey kind of way. I'm just glad my wife's day wasn't ruined by it. My best friend, who she blew, has one hell of a story for all of his friends about my wedding. Story 13. I have a couple, unfortunately. My first marriage didn't go very well. At the wedding, I had a rented tux on, and I asked my new wife not to smear cake on me when we cut the cake because of that. Of course, when the time came, it wasn't just a cute smear of frosting or something like you'd see at most weddings. Oh no. She full-on plastered me with cake and a mess of frosting and food coloring. I don't know what was worse, being angry and hurt and embarrassed when the whole room was watching, or when people were pulling me aside later and apologizing for it when she and her parents were still laughing and making jokes about it a couple of hours later. I thankfully remarried a great person years later, and we had a small ceremony that was really very nice. Our photographer was taking pictures afterward before we were heading to the reception, and I had been talking to my dad when he started, so he just took our pictures together first. My mom, being who she is, was angry by not being the first to get her picture taken when she wanted and proceeded to throw a fit and leave. My parents had been divorced for at least a decade or so prior to this. Maybe a couple of minutes later, we were all lining up and getting family together for pictures, and when I couldn't find my mom, I learned that she'd stormed off and left. On what would otherwise be one of the best days of my life, there'd always be that storm cloud of pettiness that she left behind because she couldn't handle putting one of her kids ahead of herself for 10 minutes worth of time. And there, right there, is an illustration of exactly who I don't want to be. God help me. I hope I'm never like your mom. Story 14. By the time of our wedding, my husband's 33-year-old sister was still single, and she hated that her younger brother was getting married first. How did she deal with it? By trying to sabotage my wedding. The night before our wedding, she got drunk-faced and, while ugly crying, told my husband that it was supposed to be her wedding and it wasn't fair because she'd been able to plan a much better wedding than ours. That would eventually prove to be false, and she finally got her on-again, off-again boyfriend to propose by giving him an ultimatum. We had a small, elegant outdoor wedding at a mountain lodge, and my sister-in-law convinced some family members on my husband's side that the dress code was casual, so they showed up in jeans, t-shirts, and hoodies. I was beyond upset with them for readily taking my sister-in-law's word without double-checking with us. Luckily, my photographer was sensible enough to exclude them from the pictures as much as possible. At our reception, she went around complaining to our guests about how cheap our wedding was. My husband's side is used to those typical church and banquet hall weddings, and ours was way different. But still, it's rude to judge all over someone else's wedding at their wedding. The lodge had a hot tub on the property, and near the end of the night when people were starting to leave, she changed into her bathing suit and chilled in the hot tub. This was planned ahead of time because she thought to bring her bathing suit there. My husband and I don't really talk to her anymore. Story 15. Oh my god, I have 3 different ones. Tell me which is the worst. My mother refused to wear the color that I asked her to wear, which my mother-in-law and all my bridesmaids wore, which matched my table decorations. Instead, she wore a sparkly silver sequin gown that had the express purpose of upstaging the bride, me. Then my sister-in-law threw a hissy fit because when we went into a small room with a rabbi for a blessing, only the wedding party was allowed to come. It was supposed to be intimate and small, hence the small room. Since my sister-in-law couldn't come, she didn't let her husband, who was a groomsman, my husband's brother, come either, and made a big noisy stink about it. Third, my husband's cousin somehow got the band to honor her for her birthday with a long speech and a special dance for her and her husband, even though it was also my cousin's birthday and was also my best friend's anniversary and it was my freaking wedding, not her birthday party. Overall, my wedding was magnificent, but there were definitely 3 witches there. I say the third one is the worst. Kick the witch out. Let her have her own party if she wants to be the center of attention. Story 16. My sister's wedding. Our relatives on my father's side are not the greatest, just not really respectable people. They're on the poorer side, which isn't a problem, but their attitude is. They think the world owes them something. My parents both grew up in poorer families, but worked really hard and became pretty successful. Because of this, my sister and I constantly got comments from our cousins that were just straight silly, constantly making us feel bad for being better off. To combat this, kids were not allowed, only aunts and uncles. It bummed us out because one family on my dad's side is actually awesome, but the rule stood because of the silly ones. So of course, the worst of all, our aunt brings her freaking kids. Her 2 daughters share her bratty entitlement. It was awful. It now caused a rift with the family we like because their kids weren't welcome, but they are. Another silly aunt tried to make the entire event about her. She was pissed that the guests of honor were my parents' best friends and not family. My grandmother introduced the best friends to everyone, and when it got to that aunt, she stuck her nose up, turned around, and walked away. The best friends cracked a joke as she walked away, and everyone was laughing at her. which was nice. Well, I have 3 silly aunts, and they basically tried to destroy the evening. Now my family makes themselves busy during holidays. My sister lives in another state. My parents leave a few days before Thanksgiving to go to their summer home and don't return until after New Year's. That leaves me alone to make excuse for why I'm not attending their holiday parties. Story 17. My sister's wedding. The groom's grandma and female cousins, parents are deceased, wiped their feet on my sister's dress train during pictures, then stole all the bottles of wine that had the labels customized to read the wedding vows of the groom's parents, then proceeded to bring back hard liquors, do shots, and grind on the DJ while he was playing bass-booming hip-hop that my sister and her husband explicitly said they didn't want. After those shenanigans, they also threatened to physically assault my sister and my mother. My sister didn't confront them because she didn't want to give them the pleasure of seeing her hurt or angry on her wedding day. The groom has no contact with his cousins and has low contact with his grandparents. My sister hasn't seen any of them since the wedding. The grandma wasn't doing any grinding, but the groom found out later that she orchestrated the whole thieving of the wine bottles, which occurred while my mom and sister stepped away after the ceremony, because the woman who was going to perform was dying in hospice, and we needed to say goodbye. My sister is white, my brother-in-law is black, and I don't think his family is racist, I just don't think they like my sister. Story 18. Bridesmaid witch spent the morning telling my wife it was pouring. The aisle of her outdoor wedding was a trough of mud, and her gown was surely going to be ruined before she got up the aisle. Bridesmaid 2 went into damage control mode and gave the bridesmaid witch stupid tasks to do to keep her away from the wife while preparations finished. Turns out the rain cleared out and plenty of time for the lawn to dry, and all we had to do about the middle aisle was a move where the seats were set to the opposite side of the oak where we were married under. Story 19. That witch, first of all, didn't throw me a bachelorette of any sort. She had told people she was. I flew across the country for it, then nothing ever came of it. We gathered at a friend's house and she never showed up. Wedding day, she showed up to the hair appointment unshowered and wrecked off the mothballs from her mom's basement that she had just woken out of. She stole the booze that she was supposed to set up in the cottage my hubby and I were to spend our first married night in together. Oh, and the condoms. She wanted to be in charge of the condoms and forgot those. So hubby got a sober BJ much to his delight. Also, many of the old ladies in town had gone together and made a wonderful basket full of old pics of me. Old recipes they knew were my favorites, little toys I played with, etc. She was in charge of that and lost it. 2 years later, I live across the country from where I got married. I bought a plane ticket, showed up at her door, and made her dig through her pigsty house for hours while I drank wine. Got the stuff, spun around on my heel, and she's never seen me again. That witch. Story 20. She forgot that we made an appointment with her husband to officiate our wedding. I was married at the house of the same man who had married my parents 30 years ago. It was my dad's greatest wish. He got all misty-eyed just talking about it. When I mentioned we were planning on a courthouse wedding, he was just so crestfallen. My doubts were confirmed when we arrived at the old guy's house. It was 2 p.m. and everyone was asleep. His wife was clearly distraught. She should have just told us that her husband couldn't officiate when we called to make the appointment. Turns out he was dying of cancer. The dude couldn't even remember vows. Kept drifting off into silence. I cried the whole time. Story 21. Everyone was the witch. I had a destination wedding and paid for people to come. People only stayed about an hour at our reception and took off to do tourist stuff. My husband and I spent the majority of our reception alone. We paid out a lot of money to make sure people had fun and they all left. 10 years later and it still pisses me off. Not to be unkind, but thanks to your story, I will never do a destination wedding.